Zabrak goes with Palpatine on his quest around the galaxy to uncover the secrets of the bygone Sith. He says that they were eradicated by the Jedi, but there are ruins of prior Sith sites that still embody their power if it could but be harnessed. And he is on a quest for their relics and writings which hold the secrets to the Sith's former glory. His years of experimenting with the Force have advantaged him little, and so, although he can strengthen his powers somewhat, he can never attain the powers that the Sith Lords once held. He has bought at high cost useless writings from madmen, but now they are led by Zabrak's Force knowledge to a planet once occupied by the Sith. An unmarked ship flies down to the surface of a planet, and when those within the ship leave it they must wear breath masks due to the toxic atmosphere. The poisonous air once made it an ideal location for a secret Sith Brotherhood. But Palpatine and Zabrak find only a devastated planet and scorched ruins. But something happened on this planet that wiped them all out and left nothing behind but cinders. And he wonders what caused all this destruction, and that it must have been the Republic in their ceaseless crusades against the Sith. It must have been located by the Republic and destroyed through orbital bombardment, with fires afterwards sweeping over the planet in their attempts to totally incinerate the cult. Moving from place to place they find only burned-out areas on planets, with no meaningful remains left but just rubble and complete destruction, until Dooku learns through his agents of a small group of those committed to the teachings of the Sith escaped and survived until quite recently. They were devotees of the secret powers of the Force, and such groups were known to collect Sith relics. It was uncovered in a computer system, but to be not relevant enough to be deleted from their files. For most of the time they were only a group under observation, until they were implicated in certain crimes and attacked, but some of them fled. Palpatine is able to remove the files from the computer system, taking clues not recognized by those in the Republic bureaucracy. They were not the Sith themselves, but were those who were a cult, who existed long after the Sith was destroyed, and who embraced some of their practices, but who all eventually died out. He traces them to a burned-out planet named Prelude. They travel there. He locates what looks like a small decaying structure in the style of the Sith. They enter, and find a collection of sarcophagi upon pedestals, in the Sith manner, making it look something like a vampire's crypt. He recognizes that this is the tomb of the last of the cult, where the secrets are buried with their final members. While Dooku is scanning the site, Zabrak discovers a case filled with ancient writings. Palpatine wonders whether this might be what he is looking for, opening the pages and looking over the strange characters that he cannot decipher. There are earthquakes, and Dooku says that the planet is unstable, and that radiation from the red giant star is unpredictable, so they cannot remain there for long. Palpatine sends for some men from the ship to come, and they crate up the volumes within the crypt. He then counts the 8 sarcophagi around the outside. Then he goes up to the central sarcophagus, and he and Zabrak pull off the stone cover, and there are the remains of the head of this Sith cult. He eulogizes to himself, and then notices a small book in the man's breast pocket, encircled by a strange medallion, and takes this with him. But there are increased rumblings, and debris from the ceiling begins to fall. Dooku suggests that they leave this building at once, and that there is nothing else here. They leave, and shuttle back to his craft in orbit. Palpatine and Dooku look through the books with the aid of a computer, but they identify that the stacks of volumes were mostly cult journals and manuals, of no value to them. Then he receives a communication that the red giant is unstable, and that they ought to leave orbit and remove themselves to a safe distance, and Palpatine tells them to do so. The ship heads out of orbit towards the outer limits of the system. Palpatine reads through a lot of useless parchment, and is frustrated. There are only 2 ancient Sith tomes among them, but containing only ancient lore and records of deeds. Of all the Sith writings only these 2 ancient books have survived, and even these are but part of the full anthology, but they are of no use to him. Then Dooku asks if they ought to make another search of the planet, before they leave, take down a whole scanning team. But Palpatine says that such an operation would take weeks. But then there is one last book, the small clasped book, that was in the breast pocket of their chief. He is unable to unlock it, and so it is broken open. He opens it up and the pages are almost entirely darkened, but within it he recognizes that this is written in an entirely different language. He checks it, but the computer cannot identify it. But Dooku recalls that one of the sources he has in his collection provided translation words to ancient Sith characters. He fetches the correct disc and feeds it into the computer, and the first page of the book is read. Palpatine tells Dooku that they have found it. After he says that the cult must have known this was a book of power, but had no means to translate its words. Palpatine looks at the 3 books, and says that this is all the remains of the Sith, but they are enough to provide them with what they need. Out of the window the red giant suddenly swells. Then an officer enters, telling Palpatine that the red giant is pulsing, that the planet they had been upon has been consumed with the net, and that they ought to leave the system at once. He agrees, and they go. Palpatine completes his reading of the book, and he is shocked by the nature of the power of the Sith. Dooku asks if it contained the secret of the Sith, and he tells him that it did. He tells Dooku that there must be 8 members of the Sith cloud. And Dooku says that they already have 2, himself and Zabrak, but Palpatine tells him that he will not be one of the Sith cloud, but it must be composed of those possessed of the dark side of the Force. Dooku questions this, but Palpatine is certain that it must be, and Dooku says he knows of some such men, called Dark Jedi, and that several of them are known to him, but Dooku questions affiliating themselves with the dark side, that the dark side can be dangerous. Palpatine tells him, nevertheless, to collect them together. Then there is one other thing they must do, to go to a location possessed of the dark side, and Dooku acquiesces. From the metal remains of a place occupied by dark powers they fashion a collection of spheres. Dooku then gathers together the group, 8 of them gathered from across the galaxy, all eagerly waiting to join the new Sith. Dooku addresses them all, and then Palpatine arrives with Zabrak. Dooku looks at Palpatine before he leaves the room. Zabrak stands off behind Palpatine, and then takes out a number of small spheres and hands one to each of the members. One larger globe sits before Palpatine. Then he reaches forth, and places his hands upon the globe. Nothing happens at first, as Palpatine closes his eyes, and his face contorts more strongly. Zabrak watches with interest. Then the lights within the room flicker, then their spheres begin to glow, and then lightning begins to shoot from each of them towards the large one Palpatine is holding. And lightning from them to their spheres. They are screaming out as blue energy bolts fill the room. Until slowly each of them sinks down and drops his sphere. Then the energy bolts cease. Palpatine himself is hunched down over the large sphere. Zabrak then goes to the door and opens it, and Dooku enters. But then Palpatine raises up, but there is smoke rising from his body. Dooku looks at all the other men in the room, and he checks him, but then Palpatine speaks. Dooku addresses his master. Palpatine breathes in deeply, hissing through his teeth. There is just silence apart from this. Then Dooku goes to check the others, but he tells him that there is no use, they are all dead. Dooku asks about it and he says that sacrificing them was the only way, and necessary to concentrate the dark powers of the Force. Then he turns towards Dooku, who reacts by saying, "Master, your face." Palpatine says that it is but a small price to pay, and his face, beneath his hood, is now permanently disfigured. The amount he ingested scarred his features, and some was drained off by Zabrak. "So now," says Palpatine, "he has gained all the powers of the Sith, and will now be known as Lord Sidious, while Zabrak, his apprentice, will be Lord Maul." But Dooku is astonished at the destructive nature of the Sith. And this was the secret of the Sith, that had been lost for centuries, that only through the death of others could the dark side be concentrated into one master. But the Force could slowly be drawn off by an apprentice. And if Zabrak remains a devotee of the dark side, then all of the dark power of Sidious will be transferred to his apprentice at his demise. But only enough dark power exists for 2, which established the code of 2 lords, among the Sith, 1 master, and 1 apprentice.